I'm Maya. I was 29 years old that night, and right now, as I'm telling you this, I can still feel the same tightness in my chest I felt back then. I was exhausted in a way sleep doesn't fix. My body was shaky, my head was light, and emotionally I was running on something dangerously close to empty. I remember thinking I just needed to get outside, get air, keep moving because stopping felt like admitting something was wrong. And I was terrified of that. They threw me out the night before my graduation, so I bought a one-way ticket and never looked back. Before I dive into this story, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Drop your location in the comments below, hit that like button, and if you're new here, subscribe to hear more stories about standing up for yourself when it matters most. Now let me take you back to how this all began. The bell above the diner door made a weak little sound when I pushed my chair back. It was past midnight, the kind of hour where the world feels unfinished and you start questioning every choice that brought you there. My legs felt rubbery, like they didn't fully belong to me, but I ignored it. I always ignored it. I'd learned a long time ago that my body complaining was just noise I had to push through. I reached for my jacket, pretending I wasn't dizzy, pretending I hadn't been counting the minutes until I could lie down somewhere, anywhere. The waitress noticed. Of course she did. She had that kind of awareness, the kind you only get when you've spent years watching people unravel quietly over cheap meals and refilled coffee cups. She was wiping down the counter when I stood up, and I saw her pause, just for a second, like she was deciding whether to say something or let me go. I smiled at her, that automatic smile I used when I didn't want questions. The "I'm fine" smile. I took 3 steps toward the door. That's when I heard the lock click. It was soft, almost polite, but loud enough to stop me cold. I turned around, confused, embarrassed, a little annoyed. She was standing there with the keys still in her hand, looking at me the way people look at you when they see past the performance. She didn't sound dramatic. She didn't sound scared. She just said, "Promise you won't pass out." I laughed. I actually laughed because that felt easier than admitting the truth. I told her I was fine, that I just needed air, that I'd been on my feet all day. I'd said those words so many times they felt like a script.
She didn't argue.
She just pulled out a chair and nudged it toward me with her foot, like this was the most normal thing in the world. "Sit for a minute," she said. "If you still want to go after, I'll unlock it." Something about the way she said it made my throat tighten. Not pity, not authority, just calm certainty. I sat because suddenly I wasn't sure my legs would hold me if I didn't. The chair felt colder than I expected. I wrapped my arms around myself, trying not to shake, trying not to cry, trying not to do anything that would confirm what I was desperately denying. I hadn't eaten properly in days. Not because I couldn't, but because I didn't feel like I deserved to slow down long enough to care. I'd been living like that for months, running from place to place, job to job, couch to couch, telling myself it was temporary, telling myself I was strong, telling myself this was what independence looked like. I didn't tell people I was struggling.
I made it a point not to.
Needing help had always come with a cost in my life, and I'd learned early that it was safer to bleed quietly. The waitress slid a glass of water toward me, without asking. My hands shook when I picked it up. I hated that she could see it. I hated that my body was betraying me in front of a stranger. I took a sip and felt my stomach cramp, like it was angry at me for ignoring it for so long. I stared at the tabletop, tracing old scratches with my finger, trying to stay present, trying not to float away into that lightheaded fog that scared me more than I wanted to admit. As I sat there, memories started creeping in, the kind you don't invite. I thought about the night I'd packed my bags before graduation, how quickly congratulations turned into accusations, how love in my family had always come with rules I never quite managed to follow. I remembered standing in my childhood bedroom, suitcase open, realizing I had no plan beyond leaving. That was the first time I'd learned that walking away felt powerful, even when it broke you. The diner was too quiet. The neon sign outside buzzed faintly, flickering red light across the window. I realized I couldn't remember the last time someone had told me to sit down without expecting something in return. The idea unsettled me. My chest felt heavy, like I was holding something back that had been waiting years to come out. "You don't have to explain," the waitress said suddenly, as if she could hear my thoughts. "Just breathe." That was the moment I knew this wasn't just about nearly passing out. It was about all the times I'd pushed myself past the edge because stopping meant facing how alone I really felt. Sitting there, locked in a diner I never planned to be in, I felt stripped of the version of myself I showed the world. The capable one, the unbreakable one. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't know how to stand back up. I could feel the minutes stretching into something heavier, almost liquid, pressing down on my shoulders. My head was light, my stomach still knotted, but I couldn't move. Not because the door was locked, but because my mind refused to let me. Every memory of running, of proving, of surviving alone, collided in my chest like a storm. The waitress refilled my water without a word, just slid it across the table with that same calm certainty that was starting to feel like a lifeline. I held the glass between my trembling hands, listening to the soft hum of the neon outside, and realized I hadn't let myself sit still, really still in years. Not for hours, not for a night, not even for a single uninterrupted moment. I closed my eyes, and suddenly I was back in my apartment a week ago, staring at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. I barely recognized myself. The woman looking back had pale circles under her eyes, jaw tight, and an expression I couldn't remember ever wearing, exhaustion mixed with resignation. I had been so busy pretending, running errands, taking extra shifts, scrolling through life on autopilot, that my own body had become a stranger. And now, here I was, finally forced to confront it in the quiet glow of a neon-lit diner. I opened my eyes and looked at the waitress. She wasn't waiting for me to speak. She didn't need me to explain. And yet I started talking anyway. I don't know why. I don't even remember the words clearly, but I started with the small things. My name, my age, why I was here, why I was running. And as I spoke, the floodgates opened. Memories I'd stuffed into the far corners of my mind spilled out. Nights crying alone, meals skipped, bills unpaid, the shame of asking for help and being dismissed. I confessed things I had never told anyone, and she just listened, nodding slowly, like she understood everything without needing to comment. At some point, the dizziness ebbed slightly, replaced by a different kind of weight, a heavier, honest one. I was carrying all my fear, guilt, and pride in a way I couldn't put down anymore. And for the first time, it didn't feel like weakness. It felt like a reckoning. The waitress finally spoke, voice soft but firm. You don't have to do everything alone. Not everything. Not always. Her words struck me like a lightning bolt I didn't know I needed. I felt tears springing unbidden, and I let them fall. It wasn't just relief, it was recognition. Recognition that I had been living in survival mode for so long that I'd forgotten how to exist in peace. Recognition that strength didn't always mean moving forward at full speed. Sometimes strength was pausing, sitting, breathing, allowing yourself to be human. Hours seemed to pass. Or maybe only minutes. Time had lost meaning. I watched as the first hint of dawn crept through the windows, painting the cracked linoleum floors with soft, forgiving light. And with it, a strange clarity began to settle over me. The locked door, which had felt like a trap, now felt like a shield, a rare, unexpected chance to stop, to reflect, to start piecing myself back together. I left the diner slowly, carefully, as if each step was being measured by a new sense of patience I didn't know I possessed. I didn't run. I didn't stumble. I walked. The waitress waved quietly as I exited, the key jingling in her hand. See you around, she said, and I believed her. Not because I had any plans to come back, but because for the first time in a long time, I felt capable of existing in a world that had previously felt too heavy. Walking out into the early morning air, I realized I didn't need to pass out to understand my limits. I didn't need to hit rock bottom to demand help or to recognize my own worth. The night hadn't just shown me my fragility, it had revealed my capacity for honesty, for vulnerability, for letting someone, even a stranger, care. And that, I thought, was the first real step towards strength I had ever taken. I made it back to my apartment and collapsed onto the couch, but this time it wasn't like the past collapses. I wasn't ignoring reality. I wasn't denying what had happened. I was letting it settle into me, letting myself feel every ache, every pang, every quiet triumph of having survived the night with my dignity mostly intact. And somewhere deep inside, I knew that the locked door, the waitress, the unspoken insistence that I pause, had shifted something permanent inside me. Strength, I realized, wasn't about never failing. It was about being willing to sit down when the world demanded I keep moving, to face what I had been avoiding, and to let the first light of a new day catch me awake, not collapsed, not broken, but quietly, undeniably human. The days after that night were quieter, but in a way that felt heavier than the chaos I'd grown used to. I returned to the routines I thought were necessary: work, bills, endless errands, but something had shifted. The memory of the diner, the locked door, and that waitress's words lingered like an echo I couldn't ignore. It wasn't dramatic. No one came knocking to announce that I had changed. The world carried on as usual, indifferent to the quiet awakening taking place inside me. But I noticed it in small things. The way I let myself sit on the couch for a few minutes without feeling guilty, the way I let the sunlight hit my face during my morning coffee, the way I realized I was breathing more fully than I had in months. It was during one of those mornings that I started remembering all the times I had pushed myself too hard, the way I had learned to ignore my body and emotions as if they were obstacles to my success rather than signals of survival. My career had demanded relentless pace. My relationships had demanded perfection. My family had demanded obedience. And I had complied over and over until compliance became instinct. But instinct, I realized, is not wisdom. And survival is not thriving. That realization hit me harder than I expected. I wanted more than mere survival. I wanted to feel alive, not just barely existing. I began small. I allowed myself to accept help in tiny doses. I didn't leap into grand gestures of self-care. I poured a cup of tea and sat without checking my phone. I answered a friend's text without scrolling away halfway through. I let myself pause before responding to the world's endless demands. Each act felt insignificant on its own, but collectively, they began to form a foundation I hadn't realized I was capable of building. And yet, not everything was smooth. Every step toward softness, toward allowing myself to be human, was met with resistance. I felt guilty. I felt ashamed. I questioned whether I deserved even these small respites. Old habits of pushing, of ignoring, of striving beyond reason, clawed at me with familiar intensity. Nights came, and I would lay awake thinking about all the opportunities one had missed, all the times I had ignored my needs, all the moments I had let pride dictate my actions. Sometimes the tears came unbidden. Sometimes the frustration made me scream silently into my pillow. But slowly, the anger and exhaustion started to feel like something I could manage rather than something that managed me. I began writing again, something I hadn't done since my college days. Words poured out of me in raw, jagged lines. I wrote about the night at the diner, about the exhaustion that had become my default state, about the fear and shame I had carried for years. And I wrote about hope, tentative as it was. Writing became a mirror I could face, a place where I could be honest, without judgment. It was painful, but it was freeing. One afternoon, I found myself walking past a small cafe near my apartment. The scent of fresh bread and coffee made my chest ache with nostalgia. Without realizing why, I went inside. I didn't know what I was looking for. Maybe it was the comfort of warmth. Maybe it was to test whether I could allow myself small indulgences without guilt. I sat at a table by the window, ordered a pastry, and let myself watch people pass by outside. I felt no rush, no demand, no need to prove anything. For the first time in years, I felt present. Weeks passed, and slowly, these small acts of attention to myself began to accumulate into something bigger. I reached out to family members I had avoided, cautiously, carefully. I allowed myself to speak honestly in conversations I had previously skirted. I even applied for a creative writing workshop, something I had dreamed about but had convinced myself was impractical, irresponsible, or indulgent. And with every choice to honor my own needs, I felt a quiet strength grow inside me. Not the flashy, dramatic kind of strength, but a soft, resilient kind. Like roots growing beneath soil, unseen but powerful. Through it all, the memory of that locked diner door stayed with me. Not as a threat, but as a reminder. A reminder that sometimes the universe puts you in a position where you have no choice but to confront yourself, to pause, to recognize the weight you carry. And in doing so, you learn that vulnerability is not weakness, that needing support does not make you small, and that you can still stand tall even if it is after a long, slow sit in the quiet. And slowly, the woman I saw in the mirror began to change. Her eyes were less haunted, her shoulders less rigid. The exhaustion still lingered, but it was no longer a defining feature of her life. She had learned, at last, that being human didn't mean being inadequate. It meant being alive, fully and unapologetically, with all the cracks, trembles, and moments of beauty intact. I began to notice the small ways life invited me to truly exist. The mornings no longer felt like a countdown to exhaustion. Instead, they became stretches of possibility. I learned to sit on my balcony with my tea and watch the city wake up, letting the sounds of traffic, birds, and distant conversations settle around me instead of trying to escape them. Each sip, each inhale, each blink became a quiet act of permission. Permission to exist without proving, without performing, without running. I realized that for years I had treated every moment like a test. If I slowed, I feared I would fail. But slowing down didn't feel like failure. It felt like survival finally stepping aside so life could walk in. The world still demanded things of me. Work deadlines loomed, bills piled up, and relationships required effort. But I approached them differently. I set boundaries. I stopped saying yes reflexively. I began to prioritize my own capacity, my own well-being, in ways I hadn't dared before. People noticed. Some were resistant. Others were quietly supportive. And through it all, I discovered that standing up for myself didn't require confrontation or drama. Sometimes it required stillness, patience, and the courage to value my own needs. I started reconnecting with friends I had drifted from, not out of obligation, but with a newfound honesty. Conversations became deeper, more genuine. I listened more, laughed more, and cried more, not hiding the tears as I once would have. Vulnerability became a bridge rather than a weakness. And through these connections, I realized how long I had been carrying isolation as a badge of strength, when in reality it had been a weight that almost crushed me. Writing became a lifeline. Every journal entry, every draft, every sentence allowed me to unpack the complexities of my emotions and confront truths I had avoided. I wrote about my past, my fears, my small victories, and the nights I had felt utterly alone. I wrote about the diner, the locked door, and the waitress's voice echoing in my memory, soft, insistent, and transformative. Writing wasn't just expression. It became a map of my own resilience. I could see the patterns, the fractures, and the beauty of my survival traced across the page. One evening, months after that night, I found myself walking near the same diner. I paused, hesitant, unsure whether I wanted to reopen that chapter or simply honor it from afar. The door was unlocked now, the neon sign buzzing faintly as always. I didn't go inside. I simply stood there for a moment, feeling the air around me, feeling the weight I had once carried, and feeling the lightness I was slowly learning to hold. It struck me then that the waitress had given me more than a chair. She had given me permission to reclaim myself, piece by piece. I began to notice joy again, subtle and quiet. The way sunlight glinted off leaves, the rhythm of a song that made my chest swell, the taste of a pastry enjoyed without guilt. I celebrated these small moments, recognizing them as proof that life could be tender even after years of struggle. And through it all, I learned that strength wasn't about never falling, never needing help, or never slowing down. Strength was about showing up, even when afraid, even when vulnerable, and allowing yourself to heal in the spaces life unexpectedly opens for you. Looking back, I understand that night at the diner wasn't just a moment of weakness. It was the pivot that set the rest of my journey into motion. The locked door, the simple words, the insistence to pause, they became a symbol of what I had been missing: presence, self-respect, and the courage to embrace my own humanity. It wasn't an instant transformation. It wasn't a magical solution, but it was real. And real is something I had been starving for, quietly and unknowingly, all my life. Now, when I face challenges, when life's pressure threatens to push me into old patterns, I remember the diner. I remember the way I felt both fragile and awakening at the same time. I remember sitting, truly sitting, and letting the world wait for me for once. That memory grounds me. It reminds me that healing is incremental, that self-love is often quiet, and that sometimes the universe stops you, not to punish, but to teach. I'm not perfect. I still have nights of doubt, moments of fatigue, times when I question whether I'm strong enough. But I have also learned that strength is not absence of struggle. Strength is presence. Presence in the moments that demand patience. Presence with myself when the world expects speed. Presence in the quiet act of choosing life every day, no matter how heavy it feels. And as I stand in that presence, I finally understand what it means to be alive, fully and unapologetically, in all my fragility and my resilience. The woman I once saw as weak, exhausted, and alone now exists differently. She exists aware, compassionate, and unafraid to lean on others when needed. She walks into the world carrying both scars and wisdom, accepting that vulnerability and strength are not opposites, but companions on the same journey. And for the first time, I am at peace with being human, deeply, messily, beautifully human.
V.